This is CXO Secrets, the podcast that takes you inside the minds of business and technology leaders and reveals the strategies behind their success. Coming up in today's show.
Some companies will operate in a world that says if you make a mistake, you're in trouble. And all that does is cause the mistakes to go hidden. It becomes that grey area where people aren't honest. And I think that culture of honesty is huge. I think if we go right back to that, is it a mistake or is it a learning point for us? I think the fact that people will own up quickly or say that something happened and tell us quickly, raise that incident to us and say, I've accidentally sent a load of data out to someone I shouldn't. Well, we can immediately address it. And what I want a culture that says we're honest, as opposed to one that feels they're going to hide because of retribution. And the next time I know about that problem is when the ICO calls. And I think that's a big shift for us, is that you can have that freedom to speak up, that constant education. I am told that I'm quite a good influencer. And I think that honesty balances quite out with the influencing side of it. You've got to read your room. When you are giving a presentation to multiple members of the executive committee, they all want different things. CFO cares about the money. The COO cares about the service. The CMO, the chief medical officer, cares about patient care. So everybody's got a different understanding of what you're talking about, or a different consideration when you're presenting to them. So it's really important that you manage that message in 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 different ways, depending on who you're presenting to. And I think that it comes down to how do you influence people so that you walk into a room. An old MD once told me years ago, never walk into a boardroom unless you're expecting a yes. Because if you're not, you haven't prepped for it. And if you're expecting some no's and you're about to go into an argument or a debate, you've failed already. So it's always about making sure you're fully prepared, you're ready to influence, and you're confident enough to know that when you walk in, you can get that yes. I think that's really, really key for it.
CXO Secrets is powered by EDS, going beyond connections. Find out about upcoming C-level events, experiences and insights at edsxevents.com. Hammond Reddie, CISO at Spire Healthcare. Thank you for joining us on CXO Secrets.
Morning, David, and thank you for having me.
Whereabouts are you joining us from today, and what has your work week looked like so far?
Work week has been hectic, always hectic. I don't think it ever slowly diminished. It's always been, it's always a bit crazy in the world of cybersecurity, especially in healthcare. Where am I? I'm up in Macclesfield, which is a small town just on the edge of the Peak District, in the northwest of England, just south of Manchester.
And a very beautiful part of the UK as well. Somewhere, unfortunately, I tend to travel through rather than travel to when I'm working up in Manchester as well. Today, Hammond, I'd like to chat about your InfoSec work in healthcare and perhaps some of the specifics of that sector from an InfoSec point of view, and then really look closely at the cyber awareness education piece within that, because it's fair to say, and it's not being melodramatic, but the industry in which you work and the role in which you play, cybersecurity is a matter of life and death, isn't it? And, I don't mean to be twee or cliche about saying that, but the facts are the facts. First of all, though, for our international listeners and viewers, I know healthcare systems are entirely different from country to country. Give me some context about Spire and where it fits in the broader healthcare provision picture in the UK. And then tell me a bit about your remit as you see it as CISO there.
Yeah, so Spire Healthcare is one of the largest private healthcare providers in the UK. We've got 38 hospitals and 50 clinics right across the whole of the UK and Scotland. I'm here basically to protect the business and the patients, and that could be protecting them from a life and death situation and protect their data and all of the information that we hold against them. So it's definitely different than roles I've had before. Healthcare is an interesting sector to work in when you start thinking about it from a security perspective, because like you say, there are patient lives at risk.
Yes, very, very sensitive information, very sensitive outcomes. And of course, whatever industry you are in, there's a customer, there's an end user, and whether you're working in local government and its citizens, or whether you're selling widgets, or whether in healthcare you have people's well-being and their lives that you're looking after. Those outcomes are, I'm sure, right at the centre. Now, as we record this, you've been in that post at Spire for around a year, but it's certainly not your first role in healthcare, is it? You've worked in the public sector, the NHS, as many people around the world will know it. Are there any standout reflections for you on the similarities, maybe the differences that you've experienced between your public role at University Hospitals Birmingham, wasn't it, and then your private sector role now at Spire?
Yeah, I mean, healthcare got a pass from being attacked from a cyber perspective for many, many years. It was not the done thing to attack a hospital. It was not the done thing to attack anything that could impact childcare. But that's all completely off the table now. I think with the world changing geopolitically over the last few years, it's meant that healthcare is just as much a target, in fact, a growing target compared to other sectors. And so it's become a very, very volatile environment to work in. And I think if you think back, the environment, because it was given the pass before, hasn't been massively well funded, and subsequently they were a little bit behind the times. And I think a lot of healthcare environments are playing catch up, and that's quite prevalent from the NHS. It's definitely needs more funding. It definitely needs more support from the government to recognise that there is as much attacks happening in that sector than anywhere else. I think in the last couple of years that has been recognised and it has been addressed to a degree, and that catch up is occurring with further investment into healthcare across the NHS to actually bring people up to the right level. But there's a million things to do all at once. Have we got the time? Have we got the resources? Have we got the skills? So the money is just part of it. But yeah, it's getting there, which is interesting. Differences between the two. Private healthcare, it's fair to say it's a financial business. We provide healthcare at cost, whether the NHS is fully funded by the government. So yeah, we've obviously got to look at the bottom line as much as we look at what we're doing to protect our patients. We can't have everything. We can't have every tool. We can't have every member of staff, and we can't essentially afford everything that we've wanted in there, because we have to operate as a business. There is a bottom line to consider at all times, because that's how a private business operates against its own P&L. It's a difficult one, because sometimes if you were selling to a company that just sold wheelbarrows or something, then nobody would think that's a bad thing. You just look at the P&L all the time. But when you're working with healthcare and patients, it becomes quite delicate, because you're thinking about the human cost, and that's different than just a manufacturing line. So yeah, you've got to consider everything. And in private, you've got to think, what can I afford with the budget that I've got? What can I do with the people that I've got to negate having to spend that budget? So yeah, it's an interesting place to work in. And that's not to say in public sector you were given all the money all the time, because you still had to align to your own budgets. And again, going back to it, there's a ton of stuff to do all at the same time. So what's the best bang for your budget? What's the most important impact you can make with what you've got in front of you?
Yeah, and you mentioned it there, that word catch up, and just going back to the public sector, of course, you talk about maybe just a bit of a lack of investment, a lack of focus as regards IT in general, as well as IT security in that, and the fact that there was a free pass, perhaps. I'm sure you've had questions about WannaCry thrown at you all the time. I know you weren't working in the sector back when that happened, but that was a big wake-up moment. I think about these big wake-up moments. But even if there is investment, catch-up, you can't do this overnight. And whether you're working in public sector or private sector, if you have catch up to play, it's a question of which of these things, how do I resource this appropriately? Which of these different strands, whether it is patching on systems, whether it is, I don't know, whatever else, more principal architectural things, it's knowing where to go first so that you can minimize as much risk as possible while keeping the plate spinning and looking forward to the future as well. That's a real challenge. I'm glad.
No, I mean, I've always said, when people say, where do you start first? It's this, I would say the first answer I always goes, know your assets. If you don't know everything you've got, you can't protect it. So the first thing you need to do is understand your assets. And that's a really big thing. So once you've started to understand what you've got out there, and that, when I say assets, I mean your infrastructure, but I also mean your data. Understand what are your crown jewels? What are you trying to protect? Because then you can start looking at the most critical service, or what could pertain to be the biggest impact to your service provision. And that's the sort of area you want to start protecting. I think the next biggest thing we have to start looking at is that it isn't a when it's going to happen or if it's going to happen. It's going to happen at some point. So I think the next thing to cover is your recoverability and understanding if it goes wrong tomorrow, or when it goes wrong tomorrow, what are you going to do? And make sure that that is rehearsed. So if someone said, okay, I'm going to give you £1 million, what are you going to spend it on? Understand your infrastructure and your assets, understand your data, have that conversation at a business level to say, what do you want me to protect? I'm only here to look after your business. So what do you want me to look after first? What's the most important thing to you? What's your minimum viable business if we have to recover? And then let's look at the recovery element. Have you engaged with the business to understand how to recover? Have you talked to them about business continuity? Do they understand the true concept of resilience? And do they understand what they're accountable for as much as IT is accountable for as well? And then practice. That's a simple thing. You've got to rehearse for these scenarios. There's nothing worse than, saying, oh, we'll be absolutely fine. And then it all happens on a Wednesday at 3 a.m. And suddenly, everybody by the end of the day is knackered and you haven't worked out what you're going to do the following day and the following day. So yeah, the practice element is huge. The recovery is huge, but understanding your data is intrinsic to your success, I think.
And just moving the conversation forward a bit then, so kind of understanding your infrastructure, understanding where the weaknesses are, patching those, and then putting processes in place. That's all well and good. But then there's the ongoing how people are using it, who is using it, and building that firewall of protection around your user base. And coming back to 1996, former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, he launched an election campaign with a slogan that became famous well beyond 10 Downing Street. His 3 priorities for government he described as education, education, and education. Now, Hammond, you've already got the job, not at number 10, but in information security governance at Spire. But how does education, and education rank amongst your InfoSec priorities?
Yeah, I think it's really important. We've got 14,000 members of staff working across all of the hospitals. And I would say about 1% of them are concerned with cybersecurity and InfoSec.
Oh, wow.
Because they're all there to do a job, right? They've all come in to do that role. It might be in finance or HR. Well, let's be candid, they're predominantly working in a healthcare environment, providing healthcare. And I think the education piece is intrinsic to moving away from that stat which says 88% of all breaches occur because of a employee mistake, reframing that word mistake and looking at it from an education piece. It's an opportunity to help them learn. And I think it's, how do you educate somebody who's not really interested in the subject that you want to sell to them? And I think you've got to make it quite real world. A lot of the things that we do from a security perspective, when you get to the simple things, like multi-factor authentication, or being aware of an email that could potentially be a phishing email, happens in your real life, outside of work. You often use 2-factor authentication with your banking, with eBay, with Facebook, and you're often sent emails randomly, and subsequently you have to decide whether it's genuine or not and progress forwards. So we do a lot of education around that. We do that through phishing simulations with nudge training that occurs immediately after anybody's made an error or a learning opportunities, we should call it. Really.
Not a mistake.
And we do face-to-face education as well. I often go and meet with different business areas and sit down and talk to them. And because what's important to someone in finance is completely different to somebody who works on the front line providing care at a bedside. And then I think the communication element's really important as well. We live in a world where we think that if we just email everybody, they'll consume those emails, understand everything and change their ways. And that's not true, because I spend my entire life being told what to do by Outlook, because I'm constantly there working with emails all day, every day. But somebody on the front line probably only checks their email once a week. And so, what's the best way of communicating? And it might be in the nursing world that we put posters on their notice boards, or we go and actually meet them and have a conversation about what it would mean to be educated in the healthcare environment. Use your comms teams, because they know how to inform everybody across the infrastructure better than you do. So utilize the right people to help you on that journey. I think sometimes the best thing I can do is those face-to-face meetings, because it allows them to ask questions. And that's been really powerful, is them actually saying, well, I've been in this situation. What should I have done? I've had people ring me up saying they're from the bank. What should I have done? And then allowing you to help at that point. That makes the biggest changes. The difficult stat that goes with that is that if you do a presentation, only 10% of that room will actually make a change afterwards. You can talk about, for instance, password reuse, but the difficulty in doing all those changes to those hundreds of websites is tough. And so people lean away from it. And then the next time that they need to do something about it is potentially when they've had a breach, and subsequently, change them then. But how do you educate them on using things like password managers? And again, it goes back to that real world examples. What would you do in this circumstance? Why is it too hard for you? How can I help you make it easier so that you can be secure, but it's not an impact on your day-to-day life?
I think what really sings out to me there is understanding the different challenges, breaking them down, whether it is understanding your audience, not being that IT team that's stuck in an ivory tower with that ivory tower thinking of, well, everyone cares about security. Well, clearly that's not the case. But your way of addressing that is truly multimodal. It is everything from the phishing campaigns. It's everything to the face-to-face, to the posters that people see in the lifts every morning when they're going up to the whatever floor in the office they work on. It's ensuring that it is kind of front of mind, kind of drip feeding in there, and not being that what is all too easy to do, a kind of once a year tick box compliance exercise. There is still a sense of complacency that can drip in there sometimes, though, because we know that while we're trying to protect against a known threat, bad actors are constantly evolving their practices. So there's a sense in which you are also constantly having to change how you educate, how you train as well. Do you find that, the third-party suppliers that you use for the phishing campaign platforms are helpful there? Or are you having to do a lot of the groundwork, you and your colleagues do a lot of the groundwork yourselves to make sure that the initiatives that you are putting in place are still as relevant as they need to be to secure your workforce and ultimately to secure your patients?
Yeah, it's interesting, you obviously referencing suppliers, because I'm quite... you've got to be tough on them, because you're spending a lot of money with suppliers, and the prices of suppliers are going up in line with the with cybercrime becoming a massively profitable organization across the globe. So I like to make sure that the suppliers act as partners. I think that's really important, is that, we brought them in 2 years ago, 3 years ago, or 6 months ago, but we all brought them in for a reason, and we went through a lot of due diligence to actually decide to start that relationship. I think it's really important at that point that we build them to understand that they're partners, that they are working with us to deliver a service, and that there is a problem to resolve, that when we had a conversation with them hasn't necessarily gone away just because we've bought a product or invested in a service. And then we take them on that journey with us, and we constantly work with them to provide that service that it works in line with the way that cybercrime is constantly shifting and adopting to the world that it's in, and our infrastructure and how it's changing and evolving as we move forwards. One of the things that I think is quite powerful is when you look at the statistics of what you're achieving with the tools that you've got. So if you have phishing simulations that run and give you a susceptibility score, and that's constantly on a downtrend, and that's brilliant, right? You've utilized the tool, you're seeing a downtrend, therefore your mind is saying that we're well protected, and that the education that I'm doing is providing a benefit to my team, as in we're not going to get hacked through phishing. But then taking a step back and thinking, if we just done the same thing over and over again for the last 52 weeks, what would happen if we changed the way that we attempted to influence someone into clicking that? If we used someone's name that was more of an executive, if we changed the sense of urgency in the way that we've sent that email out, what do you think we'd get if we did that? And then becoming sort of honest in your way that you don't become too complacent, and then suddenly seeing a shift and saying, did you know if we did this, this, and this, we actually saw the susceptibility go back up again. So we know that we've got something to address here. So we know that we've got some more information to put into our education, and we've got another conversation to have with those teams. I mean, Perfect ones are you could pick a finance department, you could use the CFO's name, and you could ask them to do something urgently. Would they suddenly, because it's the time of year and it's because of the person and it's because of the urgency, that they would suddenly otherwise do something that they wouldn't when they received a free eBay voucher or something like that? So that's really, really important, that you never become complacent in your success and you're constantly thinking about, what would the bad guys do? So why don't I do it first? And that's really important. Do things before the bad guys do it. And you might just get that little bit of extra percentage ahead of them.
So then, in terms of measuring or at least quantifying the effectiveness of the measures that you put in place, what kind of metrics are you using to quantify your cyber awareness, cyber risk, cyber education programs? Because there are the metrics, like you say there, the stats about people's likelihood to click on a link in an email that they've been sent and when you tweak who that's from and all of that. But then really, we know really that some of the ways in which we can understand understand the risk of an organization are less easy to measure things like culture, like honesty. How do you go about understanding those more qualitative measures and then using those to maybe change the direction of or to double down on a way in which you're putting education interventions in place?
Yeah, it's the measuring element is quite hard. To say phishing susceptibility is easy because you could just get your whatever solution you're using gives you a percentage, and if it's on a downtrend, it's all great. I think the cultural shift is hard to measure, but you can certainly feel it. I think some companies will operate in a world that says if you make a mistake, you're in trouble, and all that does is cause the mistakes to go hidden. It becomes that gray area where people aren't honest. And I think that culture of honesty is huge. I think if we go right back to that, is it a mistake or is it a learning point for us? I think the fact that people will own up quickly or say that something happened and tell us quickly, raise that incident to us and say, I've accidentally sent a load of data out to someone I shouldn't. Well, we can immediately address it. And what I want a culture that says we're honest, as opposed to one that feels they're going to hide because of retribution. And the next time I know about that problem is when the ICO calls. And I think that's a big shift for us, is that you can have that freedom to speak up, that constant education. And this goes back to when we're saying we communicate with people and we educate people. We often do town halls. We do a 10 at 10 every Monday. And it's really important just to get out there and to say, look, if anything happens, let me know. You can either call me directly, you can raise a ticket, you can hit me with a Teams call, whatever you want to do, whatever you feel comfortable with. But it's important that you're honest at any point because everybody makes mistakes. One of the things we did at UHB was when we did a phishing simulation and part of the executive committee were caught out on it. They went on and advised that they also got caught out. And I think that's really powerful when somebody of a senior level could say, look, I made a mistake as well. I was running late. The email came through. It was cleverly targeted, specifically for me. It was a spear phishing one that we'd attempted to do, and I clicked. And that happens. And giving that powerful statement from somebody who's sometimes seen, like you say, in an ivory tower, to the 14,000 people that are looking up to them that says, oh, crikey, they could make a mistake as well. Well, and they've been honest about it and they've not got in trouble. Then I can be honest about the situation that I've been in. And that helps everybody, because the quicker we find out about anything that occurs in our environment, the quicker we can fix it. The quicker we can recycle their credentials, the quicker that we can isolate their device, and the quicker we can have a conversation and educate them. I think that's really important. So it's about freedom to speak up, honesty culture, and not berating people. And then changing your training, because if people can keep making mistakes, if it does become a mistake at that point, then have a look at the training you're giving them, because that's the second part of it. Did the training the first time that they clicked work? Clearly not, because it's the 6th time they've clicked or the 7th time. So let's have a conversation with them, which means that they're supported in understanding why they've done it before. So adapt your training as much as you adapt the learning part of it.
And that thing about it goes right up to the top, I think that's really important. And it builds that sense of turning others into us, into me. It's something that happens to other people. No, it's something that can happen to us. No, it's something that can happen to me, because there's often a sense of denial. I will never click on one of those links. That thing won't happen to me. But actually, the more accessible you make the admission, the more relatable you make it, particularly if it comes from a relatable senior member of staff, then the more likely it is to strike home. Thank you, Hammond. I appreciate your insights on what it's like to lead cyber and to lead cyber awareness training programs within their healthcare system. I wish you all the best, selfishly from my point of view, but also for the entirety of the UK medical system, that your efforts are successful. We are almost out of time, but before we go, there are some questions that we ask all of our guests here. And this show's called CXO Secrets. So I have to ask, what is your secret? If you could put your modesty to one side for a moment, tell us what key attribute you believe has enabled you to achieve what you have.
There's two things, really. I mean, I've been in the industry for 30 years. And I think the biggest thing that I've learned at a C-suite level is the level of honesty that I've always had. I refuse to lie. I refuse to manipulate the truth. I'm quite happy giving difficult messages to the people that need to hear them. And I mean that as in educating upwards, or, during part of audits, or working for accreditations and stuff. It's very easy to manage the message. But I think what that does is just hide things away that will come up at a later date. I think it all comes out in the end. So yeah, being absolutely brutally honest is really, really important. And then the second part is, I suppose, I do feel, or I am told, that I'm quite a good influencer. And I think that honesty balances quite out with the influencing side of it. You've got to read your room. When you are giving a presentation to multiple members of the executive committee, they all want different things. CFO cares about the money, the COO cares about the service, the CMO, the chief medical officer, cares about patient care. So everybody's got a different understanding of what you're talking about, or a different consideration when you're presenting to them. So it's really important that you manage that message in 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 different ways, depending on who you're presenting to. And I think that it comes down to, how do you influence people so that you walk into a room? An old MD once told me years ago, never walk into a boardroom unless you're expecting a yes. Because if you're not, you haven't prepped for it. And if you're expecting some no's and you're about to go into an argument or a debate, you've failed already. So it's always about making sure you're fully prepared, you're ready to influence, and you're confident enough to know that when you walk in, you can get that yes. I think that's really, really key for it.
You've spoken already about the importance of communication, and I think that one of the first rules, to your point, is knowing your audience, knowing what resonates with them, what agenda they have, so that you can, if necessary, tailor your message, or at least deliver your message in a way that will resonate with whoever your audience is, to achieve the outcomes, the intent through the communication. It sounds like you're very, very much on song with that. We do a Pass the Question on this show, where guests have an opportunity to put a question to a future guest, whoever they may be. And we have a question for you, Hammond, from Olivier Bonsignor, who is EVP at Cast. And he asks this question.
What are you doing to use AI in a way that you're not going to be afraid of the consequences of using AI?
That's an interesting one. And it's, I think if we go to enough conferences in the last few years, all we ever seem to hear about is AI. But what's the fears that come around of it? I mean, healthcare's obviously wanting to adopt AI. And I think, like many sectors, we feel that there's a future that includes it. So what are the fears around it? I think it comes from two things. I think there's an uncertainty around its adoption and lack of control. I think people worry about unintended consequences, whether it's in biased decision-making, data privacy breaches, or even the perception that AI might replace human judgment entirely. And I think, the concerns are valid, because AI is powerful, but like any powerful tool, it needs governance. So in my role, we are going through a journey of adoption. We are having those conversations at a senior level and right across the board about, I suppose, what would we call it? A responsible enablement. It means we don't just adopt it because it's trendy and everybody else is talking about it, or worse, and I think this comes often, is that there's a fear of not using it, and everybody else seems to be using it, and they're all telling you they're using it well. But you don't really know that. You're just being told that. So I think making sure you've got a framework of security, ethics, transparency will really land it well, because you've got to get it signed off at senior level just as much as you've got to embrace your staff to utilize it, because a lot of people might be very fearful that it's coming along to take their job and replace their human expertise. So it's really key that you keep that human in the loop mentality. So the biggest thing for me is the governance, the education, and then the adoption and change management. How are we going to take our staff on a journey that it's the right thing? And that's adoption and change management up as well as down. It's really important.
Finally, Hammond, what question would you like me to put to a guest on a future episode of the show?
My question is, what's the one technology risk that keeps you up at night, and how are you preparing your organization to address it?
Excellent question. Thank you. And Hammond, thank you for joining us on CXO Secrets. I look forward to catching up again in the future.
Thank you, David. It's been a pleasure.